Driving change in maritime. Welcome to another fascinating episode of Tech Place podcast series. Today I will have a conversation with Robert Kessler, product manager of Miss Marine. The topic for today is marine assurance technology, managing risks in maritime operations. Tune in into our discussion.
Hello, Leon. Thank you for inviting me. It's nice to be here.
Robert, thanks for being in the podcast for driving change in maritime. Maybe it's good for the audience, actually, if you would do a short introduction about yourself. I always like the guests doing the introduction themselves. They know really good who they are. I can read on, but I know who you girl are. But please take the floor and share a bit about you, how you got where you are, and about Miss Marie.
And yeah, I would love to. Yeah. So I've been in the maritime industry all my life. I went to Kings Point, which is the United States Merchant Marine Academy. I sailed as an engineer for several years, and I was a Marine superintendent for another set of years. This was in the 90s when there was computers were something that were brand new on ships, if at all. And I like to dabble in computers and was noticed about that. So I became the tech guy, came ashore and worked in various shipping companies as a port engineer, but also as a tech guy, helping them. That got me really excited about software and what software could do for vessels and vessel operations. And I moved more into the software world, both on the planned maintenance and procurement side, on vessel tracking, and now marine assurance and terminal operations. And I've been doing this now for about, well, I guess about 35 years.
Maybe it's good to also zoom in a bit on marine assurance. I think it's really important. But if we look at marine assurance, what are the what are you assuring? How does it work, right?
Yeah, yeah. So, one time, usually when I talk with laymen about marine assurance, they come back and say, "Oh, you're in the insurance business." Well, not really. Marine assurance is just a little different. It's about someone who needs to move a cargo and wants to make sure that they're going to get their cargo from point A to point B safely and maybe not get in the press. So they want to assure that the vessel they select is safe and meets the risk profile of the charterer's company, of the cargo owner's company, so that they feel like all the risks are at a level they can accept in order to put the cargo on that vessel.
Okay. And if we talk about risks, I can come up with a couple of them, like doing the right product in the right vessel. But what are the risks that are typically identified within marine assurance?
Right. So risks are a big one these days, of course, is sanctions, right? And dark activity. Is the vessel not only has it been sanctioned by one of the 42 sources that are out there, but has it actually interacted with a vessel? Maybe done a dark activity STS while with a sanctioned vessel. It might not be sanctioned, but maybe it's doing business with one. And companies might not see that as a risk they want to take, is to get involved in a company that does that. Other risks that occur are obviously safety risks. Is this vessel act in a safe manner? Is there a safe culture on this vessel? The more you can feel assured that they do things in a safe manner, the more assured you can feel that the incidents are going to be few and far between. And those incidents are one thing that most companies, when you're cargo owners, do not want to have when their cargo is on the vessel, because those incidents cause bad press, cause litigation, and other areas of pain for them.
You were touching upon the sanctions part. Why is that important? What is the consequence if there is a sanction?
Oh my gosh, sanctions can be an existential threat for folks, right? And I know you guys are focused on this as well, but if you are a big oil company, for example, and um, you're caught using a vessel or a company that has been sanctioned, you will have to pay some massive amounts of fines, all the way up to you yourself might get sanctioned. And if you get sanctioned, all of a sudden the ability for you to do business with the country that sanctioned you has gone away. So therefore, you lose trade opportunity through that sanction if you get sanctioned. So it's very, very important to make sure that the people making the decisions feel comfortable that the vessel they're going to charter is not going to expose them to any more sanction risk.
Yeah, makes sense.
Yeah.
The other topic you mentioned is clearance. How does that is that part of? Do you see that as part of assurance as well?
Yes. Well, we see clearance. So there's two types of clearances, right? There's the I'm going to go ahead and be cleared by the flag state and the customs authorities when I come into a port, so that I can go ahead and get alongside the dock and do my job. There's another clearance, and that clearance is the vessel clear to uh, transit the port and get alongside the dock? Will all of the characteristics of the vessel fit alongside that dock? Is it deep enough? Is the line configuration safe enough for that vessel to get there? And that is another big thing that decisions need to be made. I've seen a couple of situations where a charterer has gone ahead and chartered a vessel for a terminal. They showed up at the port, and the pilot would not let that vessel into that terminal because it was too big. And all of a sudden, now that company had to scramble to get smaller vessels out there to lighter that vessel and move the oil into port. It was a massive cost. They actually lost money on that deal because of that simple, I didn't know that I couldn't fit my vessel
Yeah. So if I listen in well, then really this assurance part is really taking place in the early stages of fixing a vessel. Is that correct?
it is both a pre-fixture and a post-fixture activity. If, for instance, if you certainly when you before you charter a vessel or fix a vessel, you certainly want to go through your due diligence, and marine assurance is one of those items that you would want to go through. But additionally, once she's on charter, you want to pay attention so that if anything happens, if something happens that changes the risk profile of that vessel while she's on charter, you can quickly interact with the operator and make some decisions and try to mitigate as best possible while your cargo's already on there.
Okay, that's clear. I think that's also where we kind of we are tracking and tracing all vessels worldwide. We know ship to ship operations, so these kind of flags can be set even after fixture. That's clear.
Yeah, I mean, I'm real curious on your take on managing dark STS transfer and some of the challenges that charterers or those that are trying to understand history of vessels and how to manage that.
I think it's good to take a step back on what we are doing. We are actually monitoring all vessels worldwide, and we are actually monitoring them mostly in the context of a port. We are seeing them at sea as well. One of the main activities that we do detect is actually alongside operations in that part. So alongside operations, ship to ship, in port, that is one of the key elements that we are doing. So I can say a bit like we are creating a statement of facts on what is happening in a port, an automatically generated statement of facts. So that means like when did it arrive at anchorage? Did the pilot go on board, trucks alongside, but also the bunker operations or ship to ship transfers in that manner.
Mhm.
So that is the capability that we do have, and we do have this focus on looking at all vessels in port. But of course, we look at vessels everywhere. So as soon as we are following and tracking and tracing a vessel, we can detect those ship-to-ship operations as long as they do have their AAS switched on. Of course, if ships go dark, it becomes really complicated.
Yeah.
we didn't focus that much on detecting. There are a couple of parties who are really into that game, looking at that, combining additional data sources like other satellite radio frequencies, these kind of things, so that even though the AES is switched off, the vessel is not dark because it's still emitting all kinds of radio signals from mobile phones, from all kinds of
Sure.
equipment, and it can still be seen. The capability, the technology that we do have actually is capable of detecting those as well. So it's basically use case driven, in that sense. But it's yeah, you continuously need to have your eyes on the ball, and that is what I see in this industry continuously more and more and more. Not only from the assurance perspective, but yeah, as we are on the operational perspective, yeah, is everything going to plan? I do expect this to happen. Does it happen? Is it delayed? When will it arrive? All these types of questions, with the capability that we do have, yeah, brings in a lot of power in that sense. If we would mix the assurance and the operational perspective, I know you were also looking at the planning of the key perspective. What do you see as things that might arise, or where is digitization bringing us into the next level?
Yeah, there's a few things. First of all, marine assurance and terminal ops really have always been kind of part and parcel and very tightly wound to each other. Um, and the technology, what's happening is it's allowing for less misses. There's a few ways we can think about this. One is, if I have an integrated package where I can understand and I'm informed as a scheduler that the vessels I'm scheduling alongside my terminal to come in have been cleared, that it will fit my dock, and that it has been vetted and it is approved. That provides a lot less risk at that terminal, right? And if you're able to be informed when you try to schedule a vessel that might not meet that criteria, so that you can make a quick phone call to the assurance team and get that sorted, the better off you are. We've had several of our customers before they started working with us that had a policy that you could not have unvetted vessels come alongside, but it happened, and it happened more frequently than they preferred, primarily because you had an operations department and an assurance department that didn't talk very much because they were using different systems and different platforms, and maybe having a phone call every once in a while. So that's one. The other one that I think is really, really useful, that is, of course, on everybody's mind right now, is AI. And the ability, when you start aggregating all of this data into one place, whether that's the overall schedules of a terminal, or terminals if you're a larger company that has more than one, and all of the marine assurance information that you have been managing and collecting, you really can insert a language learning model into that and really get some incredible insight on history, of a vessel of this type. How many times has it caused delays at my dock, and all those other type of things you can get very quickly with AI. So it's getting to be very exciting.
Yeah, I think I was always thinking, what is actually an LLM? What will the LLM bring to an operational environment? But I think if you're running operations, there are a lot of questions you want to ask. And I think the LLM is actually the interface to the database, which allows people to get an answer to all the questions that they do have or would like to ask. But previously, we're not able to answer in one or the other way. So having that capability or that ability, I'm sure that will yeah, give a lot of people more trust in running operations. It will give a peace of mind on that one.
I,
We need to be sure that the AI is giving good answers, right? That is not hallucinating. But
yeah,
I think we are getting to this level where if you plug in the databases that do have this operational knowledge, that do have this factual knowledge that has been validated, uh, we are in a pretty good place where the answers are quite trustworthy, or sufficiently trustworthy, or at the same level of trust as humans would answer it, or the BI department would answer it for that sense.
Absolutely. And I think ultimately that trust level becomes something that is personal with each and every user, right? there's got to become a comfort and a trust level before I believe what the system is telling me, whether that is AI or whether that's just a standard ERP that's giving me information, or if it's my BI team that's giving me reports that I've asked for that maybe took them 2 weeks to build as opposed to just asking AI and getting the answer right away. All of those sources require a level of trust that is earned. It's not something that's just allowed.
Yeah. Uh, you've seen a lot of done a lot of implementations within the industry of the Miss Marine platform. So you've been dealing a lot with change. You were mentioning like yeah, it takes a while, but from your perspective, if we think about change, what do you see as the biggest hurdle to take?
You know, there's a few challenges with change, right? Especially in the world of terminal ops, and that is that first of all, these guys are their primary job is moving product across the dock, right? It's nothing else, and that's what they're there for. In the past, they might have just jotted down on their hand a time to put in a doc log just because someone required them to put something in. But ultimately, the focus wasn't on using data to become more efficient. It was being as efficient as possible at the time with the knowledge you had at that very moment. So getting everyone to see value in the ability to collect the data in an easy way, and every person needs to see that value. Every person that contributes to that system needs to see value, or they're not going to put the effort in to contribute. So the onus of anything successful in this is to plan the change and to make sure that you focus on every stakeholder and identify ahead of time what their problems are and find something that helps them and showcase that to them as part of the transition. That makes all the difference in the world in something that is either successful or mediocre.
Yeah, yeah, and I think it's a very important point, right? From some perspective, I think we are still asking people to do things which they shouldn't do. I think the double data entry is one of them, but on the other hand, like arrival at birth is something that can be derived by technology.
Exactly.
It is a fixed moment that has a very specific definition, can be continuously done. So why should people actually enter that? So I think also in this equation of driving change, it is also about helping people to do to skip doing things. Yeah, they do not get any value out of this actual arrival time. It's just being done on that in that sense. So that is what I do see in this in this driving change. We need to look also how the technology is helping people to do less, or really effectively support them in what they are supposed to do. They they are there, as you put it, to run the cargo ops, to move the products over the terminal. So let's keep them up.
I agree. I mean, 100%. When if you look at what your product does and what our product does, it is a marriage that is made in heaven, if you will, when it comes to the time logs, right? You guys can take on stuff that happens before the vessel gets to the dock or when the vessel gets to the dock, and you can get down to granularity that a terminal is not necessarily going to know, because it all happens before it gets there. They might get things like pilot on board time and such if they ask the vessel, but that's from one source as opposed to a verifiable source. And then from our side, it's the collection of the information that is about the cargo movement, putting the hoses on and any delays and when the pumps started and the flow rates and all those other things. And putting those together really gives a lot of power to the terminal and the charterer for that matter to be able to help with demurrage claim management at a last,
Yeah, yeah,
after the fact, to do it, be able to do evaluation over a grouping of specific vessel calls to look for efficiencies, comparing one terminal to another to see what evolutions are moving quicker at one terminal, and learning those best practices and trying to socialize those to others.
yeah. But even thinking about the assurance part, and you mentioning like the things that terminals do not see, but do care, should care about, or do care about, but are not able. I think. Uh, broadening the scope, having more visibility on other parts that might have an impact on something that is going on in your operation or a risk that you are actually being exposed to, but you are not aware of. I think that is really an interesting part, interesting point. Like, yeah, this captain is also always requiring of always only using one truck because he has been instructed to use be efficient. Maybe that's a good thing from an efficiency point of view or a cost point of view. But from a safety point of view, it might actually be not the smartest decision.
Exactly.
Uh,
Exactly. I mean, my biggest story on that is the well, we've always done it that way type of thing. We had, there was one customer that was, when they were loading tanks on vessels, they would do a full stop about a foot from tank tops, and they would then at that point they would take samples, and they would not allow the topping off of those tanks until they came back and the samples, were in spec. If the samples were not in spec, they would have to manage and figure out what to do to get, to make it in spec with that one foot left. However, after they collected all the data and they went back and looked at all of that data for, 2 or 3 or 4 years, there was never a situation where they had a contaminated tank. It evidently became a policy because there was one instance of it more than 7 years ago, and they just made it a policy. But it was a policy that was causing a lot more alongside time that was useless. So the fact that they had all that data in one place gave them the ability to say, you know what, we can get rid of this policy because the risk isn't there to have that policy.
yeah. Maybe let's zoom out a bit. We've been talking about the technology, we've been talking about innovation, about change. But if we look at the higher level, at the industry, moving cargo from A to B, what kind of challenges do you see that the industry is facing at this point in time?
I mean, if I think if we look at it from planning, it is that there are so many stakeholders that are required to be on the same page to be able to make an efficient voyage and an efficient port call. I think that's something that maybe a lot of lay people just don't recognize, is that a port call is a ballet, and it requires so much coordination between so many different stakeholders, agents and charterers and pilots and line handlers, and it just goes on and on and on. And a simple miss, oh, I forgot to note, let the line handler know, it can lead to hours of delays. So for me, I think the biggest challenge in our industry is creating a way to communicate efficiently to all the stakeholders that need to know, but eliminate the noise to the stakeholders that don't need to know. And in that way, you are giving people information that is valuable to them and trying to shield them from information that just clutters up, their inbound message traffic, whether that's email or some other system.
Talking about risks, like if you want to flood some, the denial of service attack is basically an overflow of information. So I think we should be very careful in the industry that we actually avoid those pitfalls in that sense. But now I'm really with you on, and I like the term ballet. And I never heard anyone comparing a port call with ballet, orchestration, but ballet. Robert, I've got to say, this one is on you. I will put it into my vocabulary and add it.
Well, thank you.
So the challenge, I think, what I do see in that respect as well, like there is something, but we will not shift from the current situation to this very efficient, nicely choreographed ballet piece. It is also about improving, right? It takes practice, it takes a dedication to actually do that. For me, that is the angle of improvement or continuous improvement. If you look at Miss Marine and the marine assurance that you are doing, if you take that into account, what do you see in the industry? Is there Are there any efficiencies that are focusing on, are there initiatives focusing on efficiency that are relevant? Is the industry having an eye on it?
So ultimately this is all about coming up with a standard way to communicate between people using standard terms, making sure everybody understands that what an NOR tender means, as an example, and defining it in a way that then becomes something that everybody understands is the same thing. An ETA is another example. Is an ETA arrival at the dock? Is an ETA arrival at the port? What is an ETA? So, I'm part of the efficiency committee at the Greater Houston Port Bureau, and we have a mandate to help work with the local stakeholders here in the Port of Houston to develop a data dictionary, a standard set of terms, and kind of a roadmap of every communication interaction of a vessel port call. Identify the stakeholders, identify what data points need to move at that particular evolution, and then create a set of standards and definitions, and then provide that standard set to all the stakeholders in the port and allow them to decide what level or what type of technology that they want to use to communicate. But just try to be an evangelist to getting everybody to talk and be on the same sheet of music on how things
Yeah,
work.
speaking the same language, right? That is of key importance.
Exactly.
Otherwise, we end up with vessels showing up at places where we didn't expect them yet, or already did expect them for a long time.
Exactly.
Um, Yep, I think the initiative. I think that's where the Houston Port Bureau that you're referring to, the Port Efficiency Initiative, if I'm correct.
Yes.
And there are many initiatives going on, also on port call optimization. In Rotterdam, there are quite some efforts going on the task force, which is setting standards. I assume that is a foundational input to the discussions that you do have in Houston. Or how does that work?
So we are also members of ITPCO, and we are active. How I will say that there is a very large difference between the Port of Houston and most of the European ports, and for another example would be Port of Corpus Christi. Port of Houston is it is self-managed. There is no central body who makes the decisions on when vessels move in and out to what specific terminals. The way it works Houston, Port of Houston is one of the largest petrochemical complexes in the world. And the way it works is when you arrive, you go ahead and let everybody know you've arrived. The terminals will make the decision on when they need you. And then at that point, you will work with the pilots to try to get on the list to move into the port. So you can imagine the level of, since it is not a centralized decision making body, there is so much coordination and collaboration that needs to happen in order for this to work. And the Port of Houston is excellent at doing this, even without the standards that we've had in place. They have a set of folks that get on the phone every morning. There's a representative from every stakeholder, and that is run by the VTS, or the local vessel traffic service, that pays attention for safety purposes what's going on in the port. And they all talk about what is needed. Hey, my plant is about to have to slow down because I don't have this feedstock and this vessel's out there waiting. And between that whole group, a decision will be made on if there's any priority moves that have to be made today to be able to keep the port running smoothly. And it is a wonderful testament to the collaboration of all the stakeholders in Houston. How about in other areas? Since I'm over here where it's very decentralized, the whole idea and concept of a harbor master is a bit of a different kettle of fish. Yeah.
Yeah, I think on one hand, yes. I think there is someone who is coordinating it from a safety perspective. I think if you look, let's talk Port of Rotterdam. That's easy. That's closer at home. But I think this is the model which applies for many European ports. The harbor master is focused on safety. So he is looking on the fact that vessels want to be called in. that they are reported by the agent within the system, and then he's only looking at, can this safely happen, and that is the main driver. So in a way, the whole port of Rotterdam is also decentralized, because it's each individual terminal which is calling in vessels, and is competing for the resources that are needed, like the tugs, like the linesmen, etc. So in that way it is, but there is at least someone on top of it, and maybe it is a kind of we have the harbor master who has this authority, but I think it kind of has been replaced by the group that you were saying, like the discussion. Although I feel it's a bit more on the economical, what is of importance,
Mhm.
rather than safety in that the respect. I think one of the other important things which is different in Rotterdam, there is a port community system. In many European ports, there is a port community system, and that implies that people, for all documents, for clearance, custom clearance, these kind of things, vessels need to be reported 24 hours up front. There is a high level schedule known and available. Of course, things will change in the last moment, but again, there is a lot of information already collected because of this centralized body, and that is being actually owned by the port authorities, or the ship port authorities in the Netherlands. So I see different mechanisms of coordinating. It is kind of the mailbox where everyone files in his request and it's sorted out, and then it kind of come up with the schedule. So that is what I do see. So different, yeah, but also not completely right. When I'm listening into you, I think, okay, there are also some analogies. It looks different, it feels different. You're using different words,
Mhm.
but there is a mechanism trying to make sure that this port keeps on running. Right. The easiest thing is, like, yeah, you can get it stuck very quickly. That doesn't need a vessel to go sideways into the channel. You can also organize that in a different way, and I think that is actually what is being orchestrated in Houston as well, in a very nice way.
Yeah.
Maybe one of the questions I always like to ask is, if we there are a lot of people involved in maritime industry, yet it's still a very small world, right? And it's also a world which is really scattered with a lot of different stakeholders. What is this thing that a lot of people don't know about the maritime industry, or about the part that you as Miss Marine are doing, that people should be aware of, that people should know?
I think the thing that I really love about the marine industry is that it is a small place, and the longer you stay in it, the more you recognize the importance of networking, the more importance the importance of trust and personal relationships. I think that the maritime industry isn't necessarily unique in that area, but it is something that is really foundational for any kind of decisions, especially if you get into the commercial side. I guess the one thing that many people don't know is that sometimes, a lot more times than you would think, uh, decisions are made on what vessel is going to be used, in sitting with a handshake, and that handshake is an indicator of a million, more than millions of dollars of money exchanging to move cargo, and that's done on a handshake, and then they take care of all the other commercial stuff and make it legal. But those handshakes are binding in our world, and for you to back out on a handshake in this is kind of a, well, this is a person that we need to watch out for, and we can't really trust. So the one area that I really love about this industry is that level of relationship and trust.
Nice one. Nice takeaway, Robert.
Yeah.
Yeah, I'm looking at the time. I really, we could continue for hours on this discussion, but also let's. I think we touched upon quite some relevant topics, and I'm really happy that you were open to share that with the audience. I would like to thank you for being a part of the podcast, and yeah, I'm looking forward to continue our relationship in this one.
Absolutely, absolutely.
Okay, Robert,
Thank
thank you very much.
Thank you, Leon. All right. Bye bye.
All right.